Hi, this is Cari Corbet-Owen speaking to Lynae Klinginsmith. If you missed the first part of our interview, please click here and watch it. Lynae, you spoke a little bit about how dieting retarded you socially. How does it restrict people's social lives?
My experience, I was on a really restrictive diet where going to a restaurant was difficult. So maybe I would eat first and then try to socialize later and try to explain to people. It just created tension and uncomfortable settings. And I would get to the point where I would avoid those and try to do other things. But the fact is, that's how people socialize. Let's go get a meal. Let's get happy hour. Let's grab dessert. Let's get frozen yogurt. It was always around food. I've seen many clients with eating disorders where it's not so much that they can't have the food, but that they struggle to eat normally. And their eating disorder gets so loud and there's so much fear around the food that it's an even more extreme example of avoiding social situations, whether it's because they can't eat normally at that point in their process, or if it's because they're in a bigger body and they tend to feel really shameful and they don't want to be seen eating. And just the act of eating and the act of giving themselves permission to have a meal is such a stressful and a horribly difficult situation that they isolate. And socially, it creates a sort of a snowball effect where they don't want to eat around others, and then they get more socially isolated, and that's really painful and lonely. So then maybe they use food to self-soothe in private, and then that creates more shame, and it goes on. And it's a really difficult thing to break free from that.
Yeah. So, Lynae, that's one side of it that I think, you and I have both seen a lot of. The other thing that, more recently I've seen a lot of is people who take great pride. They aren't going to eat gluten, they aren't going to eat dairy. And I'm wondering if you've seen that phenomenon, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, this is really trendy. It's very cool, it's very in vogue. And I think it's sort of the Hollywood thing where I'm going to be more health conscious than you are. And gee, isn't that great on me? And we have a word for this. It's called orthorexia. And it's something that we refer to socially. It's not a formal diagnosis of any kind, but in the eating disorder field, it's something that we see coming up more and more, where it starts out as, well, I want to be a little bit healthier, and a little bit healthier, and a little bit healthier, a little bit healthier. I'm going to cut out these things that might not be the greatest thing for me. We're not really sure, but I'm going to cut it out just in case. And it sort of snowballs into, I won't put that in my body. Now I don't know what to eat. Now I feel guilty every time I eat. But I've seen it really mainstream. And socially, I think it creates an interesting dynamic where it's not much different in my experience than talking to someone who is sort of browbeating you with a certain religious philosophy, where they're like, this is how you should think and this is how you should live, and shame on you if you don't. And it's that same kind of vibe you get from someone who's, this is how you should eat and I don't eat that, and shame on you if you don't see it the same way. It creates division, it creates separation, and it creates a weird social dynamic, which I feel is very unhealthy.
It sort of smacks a little bit of the holier than thou, almost like a kitchen spirituality,
Yes.
where I'm better than because I'm eating purely. I am better than because I have the willpower to stick to this.
I recently did a talk for a group of preschooler parents and talked about food and kind of this weight phobia, and talking a little bit about the importance of fats and things like that, but also responding to a few parents who seem to be pretty orthorexic in their thinking about food. Let's never let our kids touch sugar. Let's never let our kids touch fats. Let's make sure there's no food coloring anywhere ever. It's fine, except I really wanted to direct their attention to, your kids aren't one-dimensional. They don't just have a body. They have a mind, and they have friends, and they have experiences. And when you carry that shame on you for eating that food, they're not going to understand. They can't intellectualize it like an adult can. All they experience is, I'm different. I did something bad. I'm not okay. Is that what you want for your child? Because that's a big part of the food conversation. And I think of the parent who swoops in if anyone should give their kid a piece of candy and says, no, you can't have that. And not looking at the bigger picture. What you're communicating is more than, no, don't eat candy. You're also communicating, no, you don't get that. And as a kid, that can really hit the kid as more like, I don't deserve a reward. I don't deserve this loving gesture. Me, but every other kid in the room gets it. And so trying to sort of go back to that health hierarchy and saying, what's okay for your kid socially? What's okay for you socially? And how does food play into that? Because food isn't one-dimensional.
I was speaking at a conference a few years ago. A woman came up to me afterwards, and she was in tears because she had 3 little boys, 9, 7, and 5. And her and her husband were trying to be fruitarians, so the only thing that they were allowed to eat was fruit. And then we're stealing other people's, lunches at school and hiding food, and and it just was so indicative to me of what you're talking about. But it also reminded me a lot that I would say a good 40% of the people that I work with or have worked with in the past were people who had incredibly restrictive eating as a child. And so now it's almost like they're making up for it now that they're out of their parents' home.
Yeah, I've seen that too. And that usually plays out in some form. My parents had this food rule. I could never eat this. I could only eat that. Or sometimes a coach, a sports coach in school who said, this is what you need to do or not do, or what you should look like or not look like. And sometimes it's food insecurity. Maybe your family didn't have the kind of affluence to where food was plentiful. And so then that impacts your eating patterns later in life if you haven't worked through some of that.
If you could sum up your ideas about eating well and self-nurturing well, what would they look like?
For the average person, I would sum it up just to say that caring for yourself and being really health conscious is not just a factor of what you do or don't eat. It has to do with how food plays into your overall health, your mental health, your emotional health, your social health, your spiritual health, all the things that are meaningful for you, including your physical health, but not trying to examine your physical health in a vacuum. And I think trying to really place it for yourself, create that picture of what health means for you specifically, and what that means for how you manage your time and how much money you want to spend on food versus other things. All of those questions are really important. And I think that sometimes people get caught in this idea that in order to be really good or really healthy, that food really needs to be number one. And I don't think that's necessarily true. In fact, I think it's most of the time not true. And I think putting food in its rightful place in terms of how it fits into overall health is a way that you really get to where health is really yours in a way that's meaningful for you, and that you can enjoy food in a way that doesn't feel stressful and riddled with guilt all the time.
And I mean, Lynae, are you a proponent of just kind of eating a balanced diet, as in, not cutting out particular food groups?
I'm very much everything fits kind of dietitian. I think unless you have specific medical needs, which is a very real thing, but for many, many people, it's not a specific medical need. It's more maybe diet focused, or trying to, I call it like finely tune or calibrate something in order to manipulate your body into something. I think that we should be as free with food as possible, to have the most relaxed relationship with food as possible. And that cutting out entire food groups really is limiting, not just I mean, it always goes back to how does that impact you socially, and how is that valuable for you really physically and socially and mentally and all these other pieces. I think people should feel as relaxed around all types of foods as possible. I'm not a proponent for cutting out all of anything, you fill in the blank, unless there's a really clear medical reason.
Because it seems to me that it's really common to cut out carbohydrates. All carbohydrates bad, and there seems to be a really big trend towards it. If I look at the paleo diet and the Banting diet, and I just think to myself, we're becoming more and more obsessed. And whenever we become obsessed with food and eating, it seems to me that we narrow our lives down enormously. We, instead of living large and vibrant lives, our lives sort of become narrowed down to this counting calories, counting points, looking at micronutrients, and it becomes so obsessive that we aren't even living a life anymore.
Exactly. I had a client yesterday in session who, for the first time in years, had a whole day without counting anything. And she decided to try it. It was her birthday, and she decided, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to try letting myself be free with the food and not count up how much of things I'm eating. And she said it was amazing. And she was able to enjoy being with her family and with her friends, and she was able to enjoy the food. And really, she hasn't gone back through and tried to calculate it since then. And she's just been able to be more relaxed and really enjoy it. Yeah. And to me, that's the best. That's successful. And that's the joy of eating. That's joy with food. That's joy in life. That's what I want from my clients. And that's what I try to experience in my own life too.
Any last bit of advice that you have for people watching this?
I think it's important to add that whenever this conversation of health and weight being separate comes up, then often people experience fear. And I think that fear has a lot to do with years and years of this idea being really deeply entrenched in our minds, from the scientific community, from the medical community, from the diet industry, from everywhere, from the media, from pop culture, from all these different angles. And I think it's really, really difficult to step into that space of vulnerability to say, what if I let myself think differently? And I think it's important to acknowledge that's scary and that's hard, and that there tends to be this underlying fear that if I did that, it would be this runaway train. I would eat everything, and I would just continuously grow into this giant person. And I would just grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it would never stop. And to anyone who has that fear, I say, I hear you, and I understand how much indoctrination you've experienced. I live in this crazy world too, and I've worked with lots of clients who've been able to process that and find out that they actually do stop eating at a certain point where they listen to their body and feel fullness, even if they've never felt fullness before. And they do stop. There's a sort of an adjustment period with what your body goes through, and your body will find the weight that is healthy for you. And I think that's an incredibly scary process and a very vulnerable place. But working with someone who can help you along the way can be a really empowering experience, and something that is really a joyful process, even though it's scary.
Yeah. Lynae, you work mainly in Portland and Vancouver, Washington. Can you tell people where they can find you, what your website is?
Absolutely. My website is The Wellbeing, because I really want it to be all about well-being, not just specifically nutrition. So it's www.thewell-bean.com. And I have an office in Vancouver and one in Beaverton. So you can find me online. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. Or you can look me up on the web and get in contact.
For more interviews with wonderful health experts, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Look forward to seeing you again.